So hello there and welcome to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast, the show where we analyze all the main talking points in the world of Formula One and also a little bit of occasional banter as well as the regular race reviews. And as always, my name is Adam Burns. I am one of the hosts, and joining me once again, my co-host Courtney I. Courtney, hello there. How are you?
Hello, mate. Yeah, I'm doing well. Soon be Christmas, not long now, so can't complain too much. I hope everyone that's listening in are doing great, and yeah, I'm looking forward to reviewing an eventful race.
Absolutely. And of course, we're in the final stretches of the Formula One season with both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships already wrapped up as the last race in Turkey. So now, most cases, the battle is focused on the midfield, and some occasions, a little bit of pride is at stake as well. But of course, first things first, guys, if you haven't checked out the last episode that we did a brilliant discussion where we sort of analysed the future of Formula One from a British perspective, the likes of Lando Norris, George Russell, and some of the stars from Formula 2, Callum Ilott, still competing in that championship battle with Mick Schumacher. That's going to go down to the wire. And of course, Jack Aitken and Dan Ticktum. So check that out if you haven't already. That's on the DNF1 F1 podcast YouTube channel. And of course, it's on all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Podchaser, Apple Podcasts, etc. Make sure to check that out. And if you haven't already, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel as well. We've got a growing family going on. I think it's 114 at this point, you know, for a channel
Not
of
bad,
ours.
not bad.
Not bad for us. It's seen a bit of a meteoric rise by our standards. And if you haven't already joined our family, we'd absolutely love for you to join the DNF1 family. You know, it's a growing community. And for those of you that already have subscribed to the channel, welcome back once again. And thank you for your continuous support. So whilst you're probably wondering why I'm looking over to my phone briefly. I forgot to start the timer on this so I don't run too long, because last week's one was a bit long, but it's very much in depth. So definitely check that out if you've got the time to do so. It's well worth it. But moving back to the main talking point of the episode before I digress too much. And Courtney, I'm going to hold you to that back to George statement. And for those of you that checked out the last episode will know exactly what that is a reference to, in case I sort of go on a bit off a tangent. But back to the biggest incident of the Bahrain Grand Prix that's just happened, and that was the first lap incident involving Romain Grosjean. Now, for those of you that haven't seen it, I would normally suggest to check it out, but it can be quite difficult viewing for some people. So I will try to explain this the best way that I can. Basically, what happened, the start of the race got underway. You know, there was a lot of argy-bargy cars trying to overtake each other, as you'd expect on the first lap. And Bahrain does tend to serve up a lot of incidents and overtaking on the first lap. It's brilliant opening sector for that on the F1 calendar. And as we got past turns 2 and 3, we went down the long straight towards turn 4. Romain Grosjean saw one of the Alfa Romeos go off the track on the left-hand side, tried to go to the right where he saw a gap. He's clipped the front left tire of Danny Kvyat, and that has sent him out control, smashing into the wall at over 160 miles an hour. And immediately after he'd hit that barrier, the car broke in two, and the front area, the monocoque where he was sitting, burst into flames. It was a very, very scary sight to see. I mean, I've been an F1 fan all my life, almost, well, coming up to 28, 29 years now. I've never seen anything like that in my life. And I'm not going to lie, it was absolutely terrifying. It's something, you know, not to make this a joke, would be worthy of a Michael Bay film. It was that scary to watch. And thankfully, Romain Grosjean was able to get out the car literally within seconds of the original explosion. And thankfully, the medical car driven by Dr. Ian Roberts and Alan van der Merwe, if I pronounce that correctly, who were on the scene straight away. And, you know, thank goodness Romain Grosjean is okay. From what we understand, the only injuries that he sustained, other than obviously the massive shock that he would have experienced in that incident, was some slight burns, or minor burns, I should say, to his hands and ankle, and also potentially a few broken ribs. That's the latest statement from Haas, but of course we'll probably get more information as the night progresses, and probably in the next day or so. But Courtney, first things first, I mean, what a scary accident that was for Romain Grosjean, and obviously for us watching around the world. If you can you try to describe your initial thoughts when you first saw that?
I'll be honest, I don't want to sound too dramatic, but when I saw it happen live, I actually found it quite traumatizing. to watch. Like, I don't usually get too affected by crashes because they've come so far with safety in Formula One. Like, if you just see like a big smash, you just go, oh, yeah, do you know what? That'll be fine. But when I just saw that fireball, I thought someone's died. I thought that's impossible for somebody to survive that. But yeah, you don't want to use the word too lightly. But I think Romain Grosjean has been on the end of not one but two miracles. First of all, for surviving, and two, to come out with only minor injuries. I mean, for any of you that haven't seen it, it was truly, truly horrific to see. And hats off to the FIA because they have done such a great job with safety. You know, it's quite interesting. And not long ago, we were discussing the halo and how, previously I was against it because of how it affects the spectacle. But that halo, without a doubt, saved Romain Grosjean's life today. So the halos definitely need to be saying, and the day as well and truly made me eat my words.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we'll talk a bit more about the halo in this opening part of the episode. I suppose the obvious criticism of the halo, especially when it was first introduced, was the aesthetics element of it, the way that it looked. It made the cars look, well, not ugly, but it just looked strange. I mean, the element of open wheel cars that we often love is the fact that they're open wheel. It's very bared down, or laid bare, I suppose is the right way of describing it, to the aerodynamics, the suspension pieces, the bodywork, everything else, to make them look as glamorous and sexy as possible, just as sexy as fast, I suppose is the right way of putting it. And you know, when the halo was introduced, a lot of people were complaining about it from an aesthetics perspective, not necessarily criticizing it on whether it was capable to do the job that it was intended for. And today, as we will talk a little bit later on, it certainly delivered that, and then some. Potentially, as you mentioned, Courtney, could have saved Romain Grosjean's life. And you know, I think the first thing I noticed when this incident happened, I mean, let's not beat around the bush. It was an explosion. An explosion of flames and everything else. We're not 100% sure what the actual cause of that was, whether there was a spark or the barrier had pierced into one of the fuel cells or something, which caused it to ignite, or something with the electronics. We don't know that. Well, of course, we'll find out when we get confirmation of what was the cause of that, and they're still looking into it. But I think what amazed me, or what I was concerned about the most, was when it happened and the red flag was called out almost immediately within it happening. It took quite a while before we actually got television footage of what was going on. When you see something like that, and there was a gap in the broadcast in terms of the actual incident, we were busy watching the cars go around the rest of the track slowly to go into the pit lane. I'm not going to lie, I was absolutely terrified into thinking, are they not showing us this? Because not necessarily because it's very difficult viewing, because it certainly was. I mean, I'd like to think I've got quite a steely stomach when it comes to those sorts of things. But even I was absolutely worried and concerned and thinking to myself, as something seriously, have we just literally witnessed a fatality of a driver here? Fortunately, that was not the case. But as I said, I don't know about you, Courtney. I mean, what did you think of, those 20, 30 seconds afterwards? What were you sort of thinking when we
You know
weren't able to get
what?
coverage of Grosjean?
You know what? It's really great that you highlighted that moment because, yeah, I was being very young at the time and I wouldn't have watched it live, but it reminded me a lot when I look back at the footage of Imola '94. That's what it really reminded me of, particularly if you watch the Senna movie. They really did portray well the reaction to after the crash, the eeriness, the lack of footage, and then it went on to Murray Walker presenting the news when he passed away. And to be honest, that's what at that point, that's what I was waiting for. I was waiting for one of the presenters to announce a fatality. You're right. The fact they didn't show it, when they showed the replay of the car and they stopped it before the moment of impact, I thought, oh no. But it's a minor miracle that's occurred today, and I'm just really pleased it hasn't been a repeat of '94 because not only do you have the family and the friends of the driver that have to live with what's happened, it sends shockwaves through the grid, and I think a lot of the drivers deep down would have been shaken up by what they saw today.
Well, they certainly were. I mean, there was a good clip of Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes garage after they'd come back into the pits. He'd gotten out and actually seen the video footage because, of course, at the time, none of the drivers, probably with the exception of George Russell, who was at the very back of the field, would have been able to catch a glimpse of that. And even then, his eyes are focused forward on the traffic in front of him and trying to negotiate the opening few sectors of the first lap of the race, which is, of course, the most likely time when you're going to expect a collision to happen if they do happen. That's why the medical car tends to follow them for the first sector of the lap, just to make sure if anything does happen, they're on the scene immediately. And thank goodness that was the case. And, you know, other drivers, I suppose the norm in Formula One, and it is for drivers to try and distance themselves or try and block it out of their mind what has just happened, or not try to see it, because of course in this modern day in Formula One, in most cases we will end up racing again, whether it's in the next hour or so or next week or whenever that will happen. And the drivers have got to recompose themselves mentally, block out all that has just happened before them, as devastating as it was and as scary as it was to see, and get back in that car and have, as Christian Horner said on the Netflix documentary, that fighter pilot mentality to just go in there, block that all out and go back racing again. You know, you take all that into consideration, and ultimately the one thing that comes to mind is, why are we still doing this? Like, there's that huge risk to human life that in Formula One we do take for granted, that these guys are out there risking their lives. And Lewis Hamilton mentioned this on Twitter in the interlude between the two starts of that race, that it's just a cruel reminder, or in this case, not so cruel, because fortunately Romain was okay ultimately. And it's nice that we get to talk about an incident like this, where the driver hasn't passed away or hasn't been seriously injured or something, and everyone was okay, you know. And I say nice is more like a solace rather than like, yeah, you know, nothing like that at all. But it does show how dangerous Formula One and motorsport in general can be. I mean, you mentioned Ayrton Senna in '94. We haven't really had a serious incident in Formula One where a driver has crashed like that. Of course, we had Jules Bianchi in 2014 that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and the late Antoine Hubert, who passed away sadly at the Belgian Grand Prix in F2 the season before. All very, very strange incidents that, under the circumstances, there was not much that they could do. But it just kind of reins in those reminder, I suppose, in the harshest way possible, that Formula One is incredibly dangerous sport, and that, you know, we should be grateful that we've taken for granted sometimes the fact that we now live in an age of motorsport where all of these drivers, we just don't expect anything like this to ever happen again. I mean, there was a time 20, 30 years ago, Courtney, maybe a bit longer ago than that, where I think Niki Lauda famously said it once, that, you know, you'd have 20, 30 guys competing every single year, and the expectation is 2 or 3 of them would die, let alone have a career, like just in that 1 year alone. And thankfully, health and safety has gone so far. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well, to a point where, you know, these instances are so much fewer and further between. Unfortunately, in this case, as it's happened today, Romain Grosjean, despite the horrors that would have been put in front of him and the situation he found himself in, was fortunate enough to only escape with the injuries that he sustained, rather than not being able to escape at all.
Yeah, I mean, just relaying it though, it's like, still, like, so we're recording this, what, 3 or 4 hours after the incident, and I still don't know how he survived it.
Mm.
You know, as you know, as great as the FIA have become with safety, and so many of the features have come together for him to survive. If you're just looking on as a spectator, it's crazy. If you haven't seen the images of what the car looks like and the position he would have been in when that car went up in flames, he's a very lucky boy tonight, Romain Grosjean, and it'd be interesting to see how he reacts. I know he's leaving the sport at the end of the season, but it'd be very interesting to see what kind of attitude he has towards motorsport in general after what he went through today.
Well, I think Roman would have been well aware of the risks that come in Formula One. I think obviously you don't see firsthand like a video message or a warning saying this could happen or this could happen or this could happen, because it just doesn't exist, and probably would do more harm than good in this instance because of the number of different circumstances. I mean, those incidents could happen in so many different ways that you just can't begin to fathom the severity and the risk factor associated with Formula One until you actually see it firsthand, like we did today. I mean, that could happen on any day to any driver out there, and these guys are actually risking their lives doing that. But absolutely right, Courtney. You mentioned the halo as, you know, such an important device earlier. I think we should talk about that. How we were alluding earlier about the aesthetic issues with the halo, because obviously when they were first introduced onto the cars a few years ago, they didn't really look too good. You know, they weren't the most appeasing looking. It kind of, as we already mentioned, took away that open wheel elements of the cars that we know and love for so many years. And, you know, people were rather focused on that rather than the actual safety that the halo can, you know, can bring to Formula One cars. And we saw that today in, you know, in the best possible way, how effective this halo is. And as we've already mentioned, potentially could, as well, probably what saved Romain Grosjean's life, I think, for lack of a better way of putting it. And you know, I don't know if you saw the crash, the structure of the monocoque, the survival cell, as they like to call it, certainly lived up to its name today. And, you know, on Roman's car, it was, you know, all burnt up. The car had split in two on impact with a barrier. It had gone straight through the barrier, and then the fires completely engulfed the survival cell, the monocoque, but that enlarged stayed relatively intact, which shows how far we've come in terms of safety technology in Formula One. And of course, you know, by no small way of putting it, the halo certainly lived up to its job in saving Roman today. I mean, what are your views on the halo? I mean, even let's not include what happened today at the beginning, but what do you think of the halo in general? Do you feel that, you know, it's made Formula One safer? Or do you feel like it's been worthy of its introduction into the sport?
Well, yeah, it's certainly proven to be effective, because I think it's probably saved lives on more than several occasions in Formula One alone, let alone in like junior categories. You know, it's really unfortunate for Antoine Hubert. Like even the halo couldn't save him on that occasion. Just so unlucky. But I think he's proving that since the halo's come along, like not long, I think the first season it was introduced, we saw a big crash at Spa and the car just brushed across the top of Charles Leclerc, I believe, and that halo wasn't there. That car was going to go across the top of his head. And then today, you look at today, another prime example, because I'm under no illusion whatsoever that the halo saved his life. So yeah, as much as it affects the aesthetics, I'd rather see a car that doesn't look as good than the dead driver on live television, to be honest. So it's definitely a feature that needs to stay.
Absolutely. And I suppose it pays homage, as we've already mentioned, to how far Formula One has come in the last 30 or so years since the death of Ayrton Senna in terms of a safety perspective. Obviously, the noses of the car are much higher at the surface of it before they stoop down. You know, that they never used to. They used to be quite consistent. And obviously, they had to bring those down to make it almost like it's like a flat nose sort of looking thing there. My arm's not doing it justice for that. I don't know what I was thinking, but the camera's up here, like, but yeah, it's just one of those that it seems strange that for such a long time people had this argument over aesthetics over safety, and I understand that the halo originally didn't look great, but I'm used to it. You know, Formula One cars, they look fine. It'd probably be weird if you took the halo off the Formula One car now. It probably would look a bit strange. And in terms of the driver visibility, that's never really been an issue. You almost seem to forget that it's there from a driver's eye perspective. So, you know, today the halo, in the best way possible, did its job and saved Romain Grosjean's life in this instance. Because obviously, when he went through the barrier, you know, that barrier's come apart in such a way that if the halo wasn't there, the only protection Romain Grosjean has is his crash helmet. Now, crash helmets are a wonderful thing, and even those have been developed a lot recently. A newer version's come out a year or so ago to make them safer. But I'll tell you what, a crash helmet can only do so much to protect you from a crash at around 160, 170 miles an hour, let alone into the barrier he crashed into, and obviously what followed with the ensuing inferno all over that monocoque. I mean, the monocoque, or survival cell, I suppose, whatever you want to call it. I'm sure a few people probably giggling away at that word, but you know, the survival cell itself stayed relatively intact, as we already mentioned. And again, that's another, you know, testament to the brilliant work and innovations fronted by the late Dr. Sid Watkins, you know, who worked on safety for so many years in his Formula One career. And, you know, after the death of Ayrton Senna, that really did trigger a spark in him where he really needed to make safety the main priority in Formula One over anything else. And I'm glad that is the case, because if it weren't for his works and his efforts, we could be talking about not just Grosjean, but plenty other drivers that have had big crashes. And, you know, the one thing about the Halo that I thought was very, very interesting in this incident was that in some cases, the Halo acted a bit like a snowplow. It moved away the debris and the barrier pieces, the shards of that would have otherwise sort of trapped Grosjean in his car, where it made it difficult to escape. And as a result, that allowed him that freedom, that space, despite the fires that were surrounding him. And you know, I'm definitely not underselling how intense this was, but it gave him that space to escape from this survival cell and get out of there literally within seconds of the incident happening, where of course he was met by Dr. Ian Roberts and Alan van der Merwe as well, who were literally straight away on the scene. So, you know, brilliant stuff from those guys. They did an absolute fantastic job today, and it just shows why the medical cars follow them up for the first couple of first sector. I mean, because if he'd have had that crash around turn 13, the only protection he would have got were the marshal posts, and again, that would have depended on where he hit the barrier. You know, the marshals were right there as well. So all in all, everybody in a moment's notice, in an extremely unlikely scenario that they probably prepare for but never really expect, or maybe they do, that's probably what they're trained for, we were able to react in a brilliant way almost immediately, and all contributed to Romain getting out the car safely. And the only thing that will be bruised is or shocked is his ego, I suppose, in terms of a Formula One driver's perspective. Being able to escape with their life is the main priority.
Yeah, I mean, again, hats off to the FIA. You know, since '94, you know, they've done so much. All the drivers have come together, and it seems that every single driver that comes through to Formula One are an advocate for safety themselves. So it bodes well going into the future, because you know, a part of the enjoyment of the sport is the unpredictability of it all. You know, apart from maybe Mercedes dominating, apart from that, you know, it just this crash is proof as to why it might sound strange, why some of us do love Formula One, because a race could be boring and out of nowhere something dramatic happens out of nowhere. You want to be seeing dramatic moments, but you want to be seeing every driver come out of it at the other end of the race. So if they carry on plugging away with the safety, you can absolutely get that balance between having good races and everyone, you know, being safe. And I think today, as shocking as it's been for everybody, let's take the positives from this, and it just shows how far they've come safety-wise, and long may it continue.
Absolutely. I mean, we talked about them in last week's episode, or not last week's episode. Well, actually, no, we did one of them, because we released a few episodes last week. But
Yeah, it's a couple ago, I believe.
yeah, I talked about how the FIA made, or not the FIA in particular, but the stewards were making a massive blunder and taking a huge risk in Turkey qualifying when they let the cars go out for Q2 whilst there was a recovery vehicle still on the circuit in treacherous conditions, you know, similar to what Jules Bianchi faced, which ultimately led to his incident that took his life, unfortunately. And, you know, I was very, very angry. Perhaps I didn't sell it so much on the video podcast, for those of you that saw that, but I was infuriated by that, given what had happened only 5 or 6 years before that. And it was almost like, if something happens, you know, they're going to look like idiots, and ultimately the only one paying the price will be the person, whichever driver snatches a brake and goes off and has a fatal accident. And today, by equal measure, I am so impressed and proud of all of those people that were there straight away on the scene and that were able to help Romain Grosjean, and all of the safety measures that have been introduced that the FIA have adopted. They really have gone leaps and bounds in the last few decades. And, you know, an incident like this, normally in certain circumstances, or extreme certain circumstances like this, you would find that the best opportunity to learn newer ways in which safety can be improved is from incidents like these. Now, of course, that's not me saying the more of these, the better. Far from it. Of course, it's fantastic. And hopefully they're even more few and further between than they currently are now. But these are the moments where you really start to learn about the nature of an accident, why it happened, what triggered the explosion, you know, what could they have done better? Quite frankly, there probably wasn't much they could have done better. It all worked out perfectly. relatively speaking. And the success of it obviously was Romain being able to escape his life, but being able to learn about newer things with the car, how it behaves, and how the survival cell maintained its structure, the halo, how that interacted, because they have demonstrations and they practice, but they don't really get a live tested environment until something extreme like this happens. And of course, you'd never want to canvas for that sort of thing to happen, but it is important to know that there are other ways in which this can be improved so that these incidents don't happen in the future. I mean, what would you say to that, Courtney? Where do you sort of stand on the safety element in terms of how much further can it be improved? Is it possible to get to a stage where Formula One becomes a risk-free sport?
I think considering how Formula One is the pinnacle of innovation, you've got some of the greatest minds, you've got some of the greatest engineers on the planet, all coming together, discussing content and ways to improve. So for me, I think that, to be honest, there couldn't be a better group of people to come up with ways to make the sport safer. And we've already seen it. We've already seen in the past 25 years how far they've come. As tragic as it is that we lost Jules and Hubert, they're only a couple deaths in the space of 15, 20 years. So as sad as it is for them and their families, we've come so far in terms of safety and motorsport. So I have no doubt in some of the great minds that there are in Formula One. I think there can be improvements. And as you said, Adam, as horrible as it is what happened, this is a true simulation of a type of accident that can happen, and lessons will be learned from this. And nobody died as a result. So overall, as it was for Romain, there are a lot of positives can be taken from this to avoid someone else dying in the future.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the families element as well. I mean, I think Jules Bianchi's mother mentioned on social media that, as tragic as this was of what happened to her son Jules, and it really was at the time, it was such a loss for the sport. Of course, all losses like this are great for the sport, certainly. But, she mentioned that the introduction of the halo was brought forward as a result of this incident to Jules Bianchi. Whether or not that would have saved him, of course, the jury's still out on that one. There was a lot of conflicting arguments for and against as to whether or not that would have saved Jules. But because of what had happened to him, they brought the halo in, and ultimately that is what saved Romain Grosjean. And of course, you mentioned Charles Leclerc in the Belgian Grand Prix in 2018, where Fernando Alonso's car was sent flying over him, and if the halo wasn't there, there's a good chance that one of his tires would have hit Charles Leclerc. And not to sound too drastic, but that could have been fatal as well for another young driver. Before we break to part two, because of course we've got a race review to do as well. We did have a race once everything was put back together. The barriers were reinforced with new, probably more protective barriers than what I already saw. Maybe in the week, Michael Massey and the FIA, because they were having a meeting next to the burnt up survival cell structure of Romain Grosjean's car to try and get all the feedback and learn the lessons of it, might decide to get them in the week to reinforce the barriers all around the circuit to make them much more safer than what they currently are. I think there's work to be done there. But let's spare a thought for Romain Grosjean in terms of his career, because of course, now that we've got 2 races left in the next 2 weeks, there's every plausible possibility that may have been Romain Grosjean's last time in a Formula One car. And, pardon the pun, and forgive me if this is a little bit inappropriate, but as you know what, I won't say it because it probably would be inappropriate, so I'm not going to say it. But, in a way, it does feel like that could have been Romain Grosjean's final race in Formula One, assuming that his injuries are fairly accurate in terms of the burns and also the potential broken ribs as well. So let's assume that, and that this, because with 2 races left to go, obviously this isn't the way that Romain Grosjean would have wanted to end his Formula One career, but assuming that this is the last time we see Romain in a Formula One car, how would you sum up his time, not necessarily at Haas, but his career in general, Courtney, in a few minutes, if you can?
Yeah, with Romain, he came in with a lot of potential. He had a few, shall we say, fleeting moments, particularly during his Lotus days. But it just seems that from the moment he went to Haas, it all kind of went downhill for him. It seems that he joined what looks like a quite chaotic environment, and he just seemed to become associated with incidents on and off track rather than competing for good points and podium finishes. And in a way, I think it could be a blessing for him to leave that, because to leave Haas, because unless they revamp, they're going to continue to be quite a negative and chaotic place to be. And you know, you don't know, he might go to a different form of motorsport and do well there and make some kind of name for himself there. So I think it's probably better for Romain to leave Formula One altogether than to stay in that environment, to be honest.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And there are certainly many avenues for someone like Romain Grosjean to go into. There's Formula E, there's IndyCar, there's a World Endurance Championship, which I'm sure might probably appease him. You know, other former Formula One drivers have done well there, like Sebastian Buemi, Nakajima, John-Eric Verne as well. Mentioned him, Brendan Hartley, Fernando Alonso, of course, you know, World Endurance Championship racer, and a few other Formula One drivers still competing in there at the moment as well. So certainly plenty of options for a driver of Romain's caliber. And I suppose, in a way, the earlier parts of his career in his Lotus days, you know, somewhat chaotic, but equally fast. And there were certain days where Romain was very, very impressive. And I suppose originally the move to Haas was seen as a gateway or a stepping stone towards a potential seat in Ferrari at the future. Never really materialized. But Romain was definitely a driver that always showed great pace, and when he had the right car underneath him, was definitely more than a match for some of the top drivers in the sport and competing with them week in, week out. So he will definitely be missed. Certainly a very lively character in the paddock. Definitely one of the more popular drivers in the paddock, but he certainly will be missed if indeed this was his last race. Certainly not the way he would have wanted to go out of the sport, but certainly a memorable character nonetheless. And if that is the case, we'll wish him all the best in his future endeavors and look forward to seeing what he's up to in the near future. So, yeah, I think that's a good way to end part one. And part two, of course, we've got a bit of a race review to do because this is a podcast where we do review the races. So in part two, we'll be talking about the events that unfolded after we got back underway for the Bahrain Grand Prix. So we'll see you in part two. The DNF1 F1 podcast is a brand new show that covers the latest gossip, news, and events in the world of Formula One. In each episode, we discuss the hot topics, interview guests, as well as review each race from the Formula One World Championship. We upload new episodes weekly, and we upload our podcast episodes on all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Play. We also upload video versions of every podcast episode on the DNF1 F1 podcast YouTube channel, as well as other great content that you can check out. So make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and click the notifications bell so you don't miss out on any new content that we produce. You can also follow and engage with us on social media. The DNF1 F1 podcast is now active on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. So welcome back to part two of the DNF1 F1 podcast. Now, of course, we've got a race review to do. So let's get stuck into that. Probably no better way to introduce that, but I digress. So the race itself, we did have a race after the Romain Grosjean incident and everything was cleared up and everything was sort of reinforced in terms of the barriers. And immediately, we ended up with a safety car on the first lap of regular running again. So in a funny way, you kind of look at everything that had kind of happened, and once everything had settled down and everyone was glad that Romain was okay and we were able to go racing, within a lap, the biggest incident being Lance Stroll and Danny Kvyat colliding at turn 8, I believe it was, and it sent Lance Stroll's car flipping or rolling over onto its top. And I'm not going to lie, Courtney, I kind of look at that like a disgruntled parent who's just cleaned up the house and the kids have made it messy within 5 minutes and go, for 5 minutes, guys, literally 5 minutes. Can you keep it clean?
Behave for ya.
Exactly. You know, just seeing that, and I was like, I thought it was quite funny, and because you know, people say, oh, cars that roll over, oh, it's quite dangerous, but it's quite safe now when that sort of things happen. When the driver's fully strapped in, you've got the halo there as extra protection. They're quite tepid compared to, especially compared to what we'd already seen about an hour
Exactly.
beforehand. I kind of just looked at that and just thought it was hilarious. But, you know, we had the safety car in the first lap. I mean, with that Stroll Kvyat incident, how did you see that? Did you feel that that was a racing incident, or do you feel that Kvyat was deserving of the 10-second time penalty that he got following that from the stewards?
I think 10 seconds was a little bit harsh. I'm no F1 steward, as you may have guessed, but I'd have probably made it about 5. It was it was a first lap after a safety car. It's effectively the first lap, very similar to the first lap of a race itself, where stewards tend to go lenient. And I don't know, maybe it was because there was still so much emotion after what happened to Roman, and Kvyat was kind of linked with the incident, even though I don't blame him for it. I think the stewards were maybe like, look, calm down a bit. Let's not be having any other major issues here. No more crashes, because that's the last thing we want this to be seen. So I think it's a little bit of a reminder to him to calm down and make sure that it doesn't happen. But it's just another unfortunate moment for Lance Stroll as well. He seems to be one of the unluckiest drivers up there this season, along with Valtteri. I'd put him as probably the unluckiest driver this season, because very unlucky last race round in Turkey. Starting from pole and he slipped down the grid, and today started a very good qualifying yesterday. Probably thought this is a bit of a quiet race. This could be an opportunity for me to go a few places, and then he was taken out on the first lap, and just another unhappy weekend for Lance.
Yeah, the second half of the season, Lance Stroll has been very, very unfortunate. The start of the season, he started off so well. He was getting some good points for Racing Point. When Perez was off for the 2 races at Silverstone, he was doing a good job for the team. And at the second half of the season, since that podium that he got, I'm trying to think what race that was when he got that podium. Oh, this is terrible. That's going to wreck my brain. I'm going to wake up in a cold sweat later on and shout out the name of the venue that Lance Stroll got his podium earlier on in the season. So I'll have to think about that. Monza. There we go.
Monza.
Yes.
We both said it at the same time.
Jinx, you owe me a Coke, I suppose. But probably not appropriate to say a jinx to in a podcast, because then it's just going to be a monologue from me. And I don't think you guys watching will probably want that. You probably want some interaction. Or
Back the George, Adam. Back the George.
Finally got one in. I was waiting to see when you're going to bring that in. But yes, since Lance Stroll got that first podium at Monza, his form has been, for lack of a better word, very, very poor, but not by his own doing. It must be said, he's had a lot of misfortunes. In Mugello, he was on course to get another one. And, some races that followed, it just hasn't really worked out for him. And I suppose, in a way, despite Racing Point being on the cusp of a brilliant potential 3rd place finish in the Constructors, Lance will certainly want to see the back end of this season, given where it's going, and the Aston Martin project that will follow. So, I think we should also stress with the Kvyat incident, you're right to point out that, Kvyat was definitely not at fault for the incident with Grosjean. Grosjean swerved across, didn't see Kvyat behind him perhaps, or didn't leave enough room for him, clipped his tyre. So it certainly was not Kvyat's fault at all for what happened to Grosjean. So no concerns there. But this incident as well, I thought 10 seconds perhaps was given on the grounds that it took Lance Stroll out of the race. But I also felt that Kvyat's car was far enough alongside where Lance, taking a wide berth into turn 8, probably should have factored in Kvyat being there and perhaps given him a bit more room. So a bit harsh, but, under the circumstances, I'm not surprised to see that kind of penalty being given. But seeing as we're talking about Racing Point, let's go to them first, of course. A day that probably promised so much for them, and for a long time looked like was going to end up with another podium, the 2nd in a row for the team, 3rd of the season with Sergio Perez. But with 3 laps to go, his engine gives way and blows out, and Sergio was still trying to drive with reduced power, clearly with the intention to try and see if he can finish the race like Charles Leclerc did a year before when he had similar troubles. But unfortunately, the car started to catch fire and he had to pull over after turn 10. And you could literally see the emotion and the anguish, I suppose, in the Racing Point team, and Otmar Zafner sitting alone at the pit wall, head in hands, over not just another podium for the team that's gone away, but the battle for the Constructors' Championship is so tight at the moment that points drop like this are going to be critical, not just for the bragging rights of getting a top 3 finish, but also the prize money. And I believe, if my maths is right, McLaren have now overtaken Racing Point in the Constructors' Championship, by which they, I'm trying to think of the point swing. They probably would have, actually, no, they wouldn't have done. Yes, so Racing Point would have been ahead if Sergio Perez had come in third rather than retired. So, in this Constructors' Championship, swings and roundabouts, a battle between Racing Point, Renault, Ferrari, McLaren, which in truth is probably now McLaren, Racing Point, and Renault. I think Ferrari after today are definitely out of the equation now. But fine margins between these teams. And an incident like that could be the difference between Racing Point finishing third and not finishing third. I mean, what did you make of Sergio Perez's performance today, Courtney?
I just think, yet again, it's another example of a driver yet again being unlucky. This is such a vital moment for not only Perez but for Alex Albon. It's despite Alex having a decent race for Red Bull, Perez was still going to finish ahead of him, and it could have given him some kind of ground going into the 2 final races to potentially get that Red Bull seat from Alex, and it literally went up in smoke. And if that isn't unlucky enough, the Racing Point has a Mercedes motor in it, and the Mercedes has been so reliable this season, and for it to happen to Checo of all people, I'm just gutted for the guy, because it kind of sums up his current situation. He's doing all that he can, and he's doing a great job. But it just seems that external circumstances are really pulling him down and making life difficult for him. And as difficult as it must have been for Perez, it must have been a great moment for Alex, because not only did he see his rival go up in smoke, he got a podium for Red Bull. And I just believe that moment has saved Alex Albon's Red Bull career, particularly for this season going into next.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, we'll talk about Albon in a bit, but you're right on Sergio Perez. Perez has been one of my drivers of the season. I mean, if you look at the championship, and let's assume today he came third and he didn't have that retirement. If you look at the championship and exclude the 2 races that Perez took part in, I mean, exclude for everybody, not only would Perez be comfortably in 4th place in the championship, but he'd actually be battling Verstappen and Bottas even for a potential top 2 position in the championship. That's how good Perez has been this season. So, it's a great shame for Perez that we're talking about a driver that's done so well this season, yet equally, there's a good chance that he'll find himself without a seat in Formula One next season. And we may not see him in Formula One again. It's so hard to get back into the sport with the limited number of opportunities available. The conveyor belt keeps on going. Newer talent is still coming into the sport. So once you find yourself out of the sport for whatever reason, it's so hard for you to get back in. I mean, look at Esteban Ocon a year before. Every argument is that if he didn't come back in the sport this year, he may not have been able to find an avenue back. And I fear for Sergio Perez. Whilst we've had no official confirmation on what Red Bull are planning to do, it does seem that there's a growing belief, if not already, that Alex Albon will stay alongside Max Verstappen. I suppose Red Bull wanted that. We talked about this in great depth already, but Red Bull, they've been crying out for Alex to give them something, give them a reason to keep him on next season. They like the guy. He's got a good amount of potential and he does a good job when he's driving well. And today, he got that podium Mugello. I think this is by far his best performance of the season. We saw after what happened earlier on in practice where he completely crashed the car at the end of FP2, the work that would have gone in, that would have been massively frustrating, a huge repair bill for the team. And this was at a time where his career at Red Bull is hanging in the balance. Will he stay? Will he get demoted to AlphaTauri? Will he have a seat at all? Given their plans for potentially Yuki Tsunoda next season, which we still got to wait for confirmation on. I feel hinges on what happens with Alex Albon. An incident like that would have done him no favors at all. So to recover from that, do a relatively decent performance in qualifying where he got 4th on the grid in the first start. Okay, he was 6/10 off of Max Verstappen's ultimate time. And today, if Max had not had the safety car or pitted to try and maintain fastest lap, Max was almost half a minute ahead of Alex. But the fact that Alex drove well today, recovered from all of those setbacks, and ultimately was rewarded with a slice of luck in the Perez retirement and getting his 2nd podium, I feel this could be the moment, if it was not already under the opinion of Red Bull bosses, that Alex will have done enough to cement his future with the team for at least one more season. We should stress a lot can change, But, I've suspected for some time that Red Bull were going to keep Alex on. I mean, Dr. Helmut Marko talked about, he's got this time to produce, he's got until this day, and the deadline kept being pushed back and back and back and back. It was almost like, as I said already, they're saying to Alex, look, we want to keep you. The contract is there. The ink is still drying. Please give us a reason to keep you on. And it probably could have gone to the last race. But I do feel now that he's got that podium, Courtney, as you said, driving the way he did today, that might be enough to get him over the line. And as a result, they're going to lose out on Sergio Perez, who I think would be a brilliant fit for Red Bull. And I think Formula One is going to lose out on Perez. And it's a crying shame that a driver of Perez's caliber, easily, I should say, in the top 7 or 8 drivers in the sport, should be in a Formula One car next season. But the brutal nature of it, I can understand Aston Martin's reasons for taking on Vettel and keeping Stroll, but I really feel that Perez should be in a Formula One car, but there's a growing possibility that that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, I couldn't put it any better, Adam. He should be in Formula One. I think he's taken a step up actually this season. The negative people out there like to mention his year at McLaren, saying, "Oh, he had a shot at a big team and he failed. He'd failed getting a Red Bull." Come on, this was a few years ago. He's come so far, and a few years ago, I was under the impression that he was one of the drivers that was only there because of the money that he brought. Quite ironically, considering that he's leaving as a result of some of these other drivers. But actually, in the past several seasons at Racing Point, he's really developed as a driver. He's become a leader at that team, and he's pulled results out of the bag that he had no right to achieve. And it's a crying shame that we're going to be losing a talent like this. And we've said this repeatedly, so many episodes in the past. This is one of the most frustrating elements of being an F1 fan. It should be talent over how much money your family has. I don't know. It's something that needs to be looked into going into the future, because we want to be seeing the best go up against the best. I don't care how much money they have, but obviously the teams need it. It's just the finances of Formula One need to be looked into, because we can't keep on losing drivers of Perez's caliber, because the spectacle itself will start losing out.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And that's a brilliant point. Something that's existed in Formula One for such a long time now. It's definitely a sport that favors those that have versus those that don't in terms of opportunity. Now, that's not me implying nepotism or favoritism amongst the wealthy elite, I suppose. But it does, it is a sport for so many years that drivers that have had financial backing, even Perez to an element has had financial backing. I mean, he single-handedly saved Racing Point when at Force India, when it almost went under and kept so many people in these jobs. So this is why it's even more bitterly painful, the prospect of losing Sergio Perez from Formula One, especially from the Racing Point team, of what he's done for them. But this is the nature of the sport. And this is something that we will discuss in a future episode, the financial difficulties of Formula One and why it's so difficult. Is it any easier than it was when I was karting, when I was younger? I was told, I was, really good. And like many drivers around me, and some better, some, that we're all told these things when you show potential that you could go a long way. But the ultimate buffer that you have, or the ultimate hurdle you have to, go over is money. You have to have money, and that's what kills a lot of dreams. It killed mine, and it certainly has killed so many other drivers, better or worse, and will continue to do so. So that's something to look out for in the future on the channel. Moving back to the Mercedes team, let's talk about their day, because of course they won the race. Lewis Hamilton getting his was it his 95th win now of his Formula One career?
Oh, it sounds about right. Yeah,
correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it was number 95 for Lewis now. We're almost losing track, but he's getting ever closer to the magical 100, where, let's be honest, it's going to happen very, very early next season. And another interesting thing for Lewis Hamilton today, he has become the first driver, I believe, or I might be wrong on this one as well, to have led for 600 laps in a single season. I don't believe anyone else has done that. Again, I might be wrong. And there's only one driver in mind, I think, that probably could have done that. But, another calm, collective, impressive performance from Lewis Hamilton. It's just business out there for him. He goes out there, he's got the threats of his teammate and Verstappen in particular. But once again, Lewis Hamilton it seems to be driving in second gear at the moment, pardoning the pun. He, seems very relaxed, very calm. And now he's got those records in the bag. They're his to sort of extend. And that's the motivation, I suppose, for him. Just another solid performance from the guy. He just can't seem to do no wrong at the moment.
Usually when Lewis wins the title, he usually tails off because it's so easy the past few seasons, generally speaking, that he's been winning with about, 2-3 races remaining, and usually tails off, and then Bottas gets a couple wins, and then everyone at Mercedes is happy going into next season. But Lewis is actually showing signs of being relentless now. He could have easily he could have coasted this weekend, but he's been fantastic throughout. They weren't entirely happy with their setup on Friday, which we've seen sometimes this season a few times with Mercedes, but Lewis grafted away, put the car on pole, and dominated the race. Even though Red Bull were closer, it wasn't the typical kind of running away, being 30 seconds clear. Red Bull have made some improvements, but yeah, I think Lewis was just managing the tyres. It was pretty easy for him, but given the circumstances of the race, he could have lost his focus. But no, he took it over the line to win yet another race, and we're pretty much running out of things to say about this guy. You're going to get the same old arguments about the car, but even when Red Bull were closer, Lewis effortlessly got another win. But seeing as we're talking about Mercedes and talking about who's been unlucky, how unlucky has Valtteri Bottas been this season? Yet again, he got a puncture and potentially another towards the end of the race. I don't know whether it's confirmed or not, but it just reminded me of Imola, where he could have easily gone on to win, and he got a piece of Ferrari stuck in his car, which cost him the win. And I think Valtteri, and I've been one of the people that have given him some stick for not doing enough to challenge Lewis. But actually, when you look through the 2020 season, he's been really unlucky, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, we look through the 2020 season, and I was thinking about this the other day. You're absolutely right to point out Valtteri's misfortunes by contrast to how good Lewis has been this season. I don't think ultimately it would have resulted in any difference in terms of the championship position. I think Lewis would have still won that battle, but it certainly would have been a lot more competitive. I mean, we can roll off some off the top of our heads. You mentioned Imola already, where he got that large piece of Ferrari stuck under his car that he had to drive with for the whole race. Ironically, the fastest that any part of a Ferrari has been all season, as I've said already. But, I digress on that. You had the incident at Silverstone where you had the tyre blowout. And of course, Lewis had the same issue, but Lewis was able to get it over the line, whereas Valtteri's happened much earlier and it ultimately cost him a podium. You had the issues in Turkey that really hampered him for the whole race. He was completely nowhere. And, as uncharacteristic as that was for Valtteri, we kind of learned that, he had damage to the car. He had damage in Monza, which really affected him because he could have won that race given what happened to Lewis, but he had issues there. I mean, the list goes on. And whilst Lewis has been equally brilliant this season, or probably one of the best probably the best we've ever seen Lewis Hamilton, not had many opportunities to demonstrate it, but the all-round package, he definitely looks like he's at his peak right now. And Valtteri Bottas, as insurmountable a task as that would be to match Lewis Hamilton, it's made even harder for him that he's not had the rub of the green in terms of not necessarily reliability, but being able to avoid damage or incidents affecting your race, which are out of your control. So there's a lot of sympathy for Valtteri, and I hope, I'm sure he wants this season to be over with now that the obligations are met. They've won the championships in both formats. He just wants the season to be done. But I'm hoping next season, whatever version of Valtteri Bottas we get, whether it's Valtteri 3.0, 4.0, I've lost count by now. But, he's able to really give it a go next season, not have these issues that he's faced, and really give Lewis Hamilton a run for his money. Because as great as it would be to see Lewis win an 8th title, we want his teammate to really battle him all the way through. And it could possibly be the only challenge that Lewis has in terms of competition for the Drivers' Championship, depending on what Red Bull do. So we'll have to, wait and see how that goes. As Lewis, as we already mentioned, driving like he had the handbrake on. I think he had plenty of pace to burn if he needed to, if Verstappen had got close enough. But let's move to McLaren. McLaren, I already mentioned, had a fantastic day today. This is the team that for a while now we've been concerned that their form is dropping very, very quickly, and that the battle for third place, as it was intensifying, they were starting to find more problems with their car than actual answers to it. But today, it was a brilliant drive from Lando Norris, rode the conditions well, judged the race perfectly, very solid performance, and was rewarded with a fourth place finish, the best result that he's had since that podium earlier on in the season for Austria. And Carlos Sainz, of course, following that up with a fifth place finish as well, inheriting those positions from Sergio Perez. So, what do you make of McLaren's day, Courtney? Because, as I said already, it's been difficult this season for them in the Constructors' Championship, and they're well in the fight. But now, after that slice of luck from Perez and two brilliant performances from Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz, fourth and fifth respectively, they now find themselves quite a margin ahead in the Constructors' Championship. Just looking at now on my phone, it's 17 points to Racing Point. Then you've got 27 points to Renault, and for argument's sake, they're 40 points ahead of Ferrari. Is this a turning point in the championship where it seemed to be going to Racing Point and Renault, but now McLaren are in the driving seat? Do you think they can hold on to that momentum now and basically see it home and get third place in the Constructors' Championship, their highest Constructors' Championship finish, I believe, since 2012?
I look at McLaren with a sense of excitement going into the future. I think you're right. I think they're in a great position to wrap up third, which should do them wonders when it comes to financing for coming seasons. I was particularly impressed with Lando today. We discussed about Lando in previous episodes, where I was concerned about where he was mentally, but today was exactly what I was looking for. As a viewer from Lando, he seems he's turned it around. Fantastic performance, stayed out of any incidents, took home the maximum points that he could. Brilliant for Lando, and also for Carlos. He's leaving at the end of the season. He's another driver that could have tailed off with 2 races ago, but to go from 15th to 5th, fantastic from the pair of them. And let's not forget that this has happened at Bahrain, the home of one of the biggest investors from McLaren. So there's going to be a real feel-good factor about McLaren at the moment. And as somebody that will always have a place in my heart for McLaren, I'm really excited about the future for this team, considering that they're making progression with development. They've got a very exciting driver lineup coming next season, not only in terms of the banter, the jokes, which are going to be brilliant, but they're 2 very, very competent drivers. And Martin Brundle commented on himself. They've got a sound car, and this is with a Renault engine. I'm really excited to see what can happen with McLaren with a Mercedes engine, and going in with third place with that extra investment. There seems to be a real positive momentum about McLaren, and if they put everything together with the Mercedes engine, the feel good factor, the drivers they have, they could be in a real good position to in the coming years even challenge the likes of Red Bull.
Absolutely. You're right to point out, their larger investors were present today, obviously at Sakhir, that they have a keen interest on McLaren, especially on a day like today. And they certainly delivered a great performance, both of their drivers. I mean, Carlos Sainz in particular, I really, really enjoyed that battle we had earlier on with Charles Leclerc, really getting the shoulders out between him, and those two had a bit of a feisty battle. And that's a nice little marker for what we'll expect to see next season at Ferrari when Carlos goes there. Hopefully we'll see plenty more of that next season. And, McLaren, as you mentioned already, they had a great day today. It was expected McLaren were going to do well at this track, given that they do a lot of testing here. It's almost like a second home for them in recent days. But, the pace of the car was always under question. I think in terms of a development perspective, they've kind of focused more on next year's car, given, as you mentioned, the incorporation of that Mercedes engine and gearbox, which they will have to redesign the car in certain elements, particularly at the rear, to accommodate that engine. And of course, they've already done that at the front of the car as well, more Mercedes pieces going on there. But a great day for McLaren, and they certainly delivered well. And this bodes well, as I said, third place in the Constructors' Championship, Courtney, their best result, I believe, since 2012. So it's certainly a good sign for McLaren. And with Daniel Ricciardo coming from Renault next season by his own volition, that's certainly going to be a promising prospect to see those two pairing up together, not just off the track, but certainly on it as well. So certainly look forward to see what they can do the rest of the season. Certainly bodes well for them. Moving over to the Renault team. A team, again, made some gains on Racing Point, but ultimately lost out to McLaren. It seemed a couple of races ago that Renault, particularly in Daniel Ricciardo's hands, was pulling themselves along very nicely into contention for that third spot in the Constructors' Championship. Today, they now find themselves nearly 30 points behind McLaren. How would you rate their day? Because it could have promised a lot more for Renault. Ricciardo 7th, Ocon 9th. Ricciardo could have got past Gasly, but he was going toe-to-toe with the McLarens. What do you make of their day?
I found it a bit bizarre. Halfway through the race, you had Ocon that was ahead of Danny Rick, but it was clear that Ocon was holding him up. And it cost Daniel a real opportunity to attack the two McLarens. Now, I don't know if there's a little bit of favouritism towards Ocon, given that Daniel's leaving at the end of the season, but it just seemed that Renault took way too much time to make the decision to let Daniel pass. And I think, it's small decisions like that that could cost them towards the end of the season, because there's quite a sizable gap now to McLaren just ahead of them. But, those extra points could have made a difference. So maybe Renault will look back on that decision at the end of the season with a sense of regret. So it's interesting. I just wonder if that decision was made, given the fact that Daniel's leaving and they're giving some kind of preference to Ocon.
Could be. A very interesting point. I hadn't actually considered that, being a possibility, given that the way that Ricciardo's been driving, he's been exemplary in his form, getting a couple of podiums. Of course, we'll have to wait and see what Cyril Abiteboul has in terms of a tattoo, as we've often alluded to after that podium from Daniel Ricciardo at the Eiffel Grand Prix last month. But yeah, it was a very strange call to not prioritize Ricciardo and force Ocon to say, look, just get out of the way because you're holding your teammate up. Their strategies were completely different. And you're right, we'll never know if Ricciardo could have caught the McLarens. He certainly was competing with them for a long time until he lost about 10, 15 seconds trying to overtake his teammate and get bogged down. And unfortunately, whilst he was chasing Gasly down at the end, ran out of time because of the safety car for Perez. It really saved Gasly in terms of making that one-stop strategy work, and was rewarded with a sixth place finish for AlphaTauri. So, another good day for them as well. Danny Kvyat just missing out on the points, but overall a decent day for AlphaTauri. And for Renault, moving to Alpine next season and just becoming an engine supplier, it shares the financial burden, of course, between two teams, which of course Renault will be very happy about rather than having to front the bill themselves. But it does help, as you mentioned, Courtney, when they make these decisions, they have to be making them spot on early as they can to try and back their best guy in Ricciardo at the moment. As good as Ocon has been in recent weeks, he's certainly improved. They'll probably look at today as perhaps a missed opportunity to get some points, bigger points, considering what happened to Sergio Perez. But as we said, hindsight is 2020. Considering the year that we're in, I think a bit of hindsight wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. So we covered AlphaTauri briefly as well. Not really much to say about their day other than they'll be happy with Gasly making that one-stop strategy work. Kvyat tried to do the same, but ultimately the tyres, the abrasive circuit in Bahrain, it was very confusing for a lot of teams not wanting to opt for the softer tyres because they just felt they would fall off the cliff completely. Hardly think anybody used them. I think they took them all off. I think Sainz in the opening stint did. He kept hold of them. But other than that, not really much to say on the softer tyres. Let's talk a little bit about Ferrari. A team that for a little while looked like they were re-emerging into this battle for third in the Constructors' Championship after the performance in Turkey from Sebastian Vettel and Charles Leclerc, where very much nearly got both of them on the podium, ended up with Vettel in third and Leclerc in fourth. A difficult day for Ferrari. They got a point. Charles Leclerc finishing 10th, Vettel unfortunately finishing outside the points in 13th, and was really compromised a lot at the start, it must be said, in both cases, and the second one by his teammate, of all people. We'll talk about that in a minute. But is it fair to say that we expected Ferrari to really struggle, not just this weekend, but perhaps next weekend as well at Bahrain, given the power-sensitive nature of the circuit? It was, a year ago, Ferrari were 1 and 2 on the grid, 1 and 2 in all the practice sessions. Ultimately didn't win that race, but they were the fastest car on the track at Bahrain, to a year later where it was even more painful for them today to see, particularly Charles Leclerc, get overtaken so easily on the back straight. What do you think for them? Was it expected today?
After the weekend they had in Turkey, I thought, yeah, going into a power sensitive track, I knew they'd struggle, but I didn't expect them to struggle as much as they did. Like particularly after the start that Charles had, I thought, oh, here we go. Right, Charles is right up there. This is going to make this battle, over fourth, fifth, sixth, etc., a bit more interesting. But he just completely tailed back, and I just think that that's another example of Charles's talent at the start, getting himself up there, and then getting dragged down by the performance of the car. It just shows how far behind Ferrari are on tracks like this. And for Seb, you know what? I just look and think I can't wait for this season to be over for him. I just can't wait for him to get out of Ferrari, and I really hope it works out for him soon to be Aston Martin, because it's been an awful year for him. And yeah, I just think it's been an awful season for him, an awful season for Ferrari, and I can't wait for next season. We'll see where Ferrari are. I really personally want to see Ferrari on a similar performance level to Aston Martin, because I'd love to see Sebastian Vettel battle those Ferraris next season.
It would certainly be a sight to see. Obviously, Ferrari have got a lot of development work in the works at the moment of the factory, as do all of the teams working on next year's cars. Matty Binotto, the team principal, for the second race in a row, staying at the factory to oversee the development work going on there, particularly on the engine, the famous engine controversy from last season, where Ferrari obviously had to rebuild the engine to meet the current FIA specs because it was deemed that what they were doing were illegal, although not necessarily proven, but the implications certainly have a lot of merit to them given what had happened. And as a result, Ferrari certainly down on power. Their new engine, though, they've called the Superfast project, which is a bit of a strange name for it. I suppose if it does exactly what it says on the tin, that's going to be fantastic. Could be worth as much as 30 brake horsepower, which certainly is a good opening sign. But of course, I'm imagining Ferrari fans will hope for a little bit more performance and a car that's going to be redesigned in certain elements to be less draggy, but I imagine to keep the corner in performance and try to regain as much downforce as possible that they've lost, because that engine that we talked about before, that was obviously had to be redesigned, was purpose built to be in this year's car, and the car was designed around that engine, and of course they don't have that, hence why they're struggling this season. And back to the drivers, Courtney, we saw Sebastian Vettel on the radio complaining about an incident. We thought he was talking about Lance Stroll and Danny Kvyat. It turned out it was talking about Charles Leclerc very aggressively going up the inside of him into turn one at the second start, the restart, if you like. And it made Vettel have to take slight evasive action, but it certainly was reminiscent of what Charles did in the Styrian race, where he drove into the back of Seb. And Seb definitely highlighted that point. He was very, very annoyed at the fact that they'd had the morning driver briefing, as they often do. And the golden rule that they seem to put forward at Ferrari is, be aggressive if you want, but don't drive into your teammate again. And as a result, you could say it contributed to Seb being bogged down in that no man's land area, being boxed in, and kind of set the tone for the race that followed for him. Because, that's kind of how it was for Seb. I mean, what did you make of that radio call, Courtney? Do you feel it's fair what Vettel's saying, that perhaps Leclerc not shown enough courtesies to his teammate whilst he's making these moves to try and gain as many places as possible?
Yeah, I do. I think it was fair, and I think it sums up the mindset that Sebastian has. He probably feels he hasn't been given the resources compared to Charles, and he's just a guy that can't wait for he can't wait to get on the beach or whatever he does in the summer. I'm not sure he's the beach type, but I think he's ready to leave, and I just think he's highlighting some of the things that have probably made him frustrated that maybe Ferrari should have picked up on. But yeah, I just think when I look at drivers that can't wait for this season to end, it's definitely a toss up between him and Valtteri.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my heart goes out to Seb, and it's definitely one of my favorite Ferrari drivers. And I think, seeing Seb at Ferrari, I think the paddock has fallen in love with Seb, and got to see the real Sebastian Vettel, the one we didn't really see in the Red Bull days. And, the lot of growing up that he's done at Ferrari, this, the more mature version of Seb, definitely a much more likable character and one of the most popular drivers of the paddock. So hopefully, after leaving Ferrari, upon reflection, it's going to be sad that it didn't result in a world championship that we all hoped we would see. But, what could have been back in 2018, I suppose. But hopefully better pastures new will present themselves to him at Aston Martin for the future. But I'll tell you what, it is good to see Leclerc in particular. I know we've, criticised him perhaps being a bit too aggressive, but it's nice to see Leclerc really getting the shoulders out and being really, really racy. As long as he controls that in the right manner and not make any more mistakes than he has in certain points. But, so some positives and negatives there. Just looking at the rest of the field, Alfa Romeo had a relatively quiet day. I think Giovinazzi tried to make the one stop work. It didn't really work out for him. Ended up 16th behind his teammate Kimi Raikkonen. Magnussen for Haas, 17th today, although today was mostly about making sure Romain was okay. And I think Haas's priorities were certainly in that direction. So I don't think they were too bothered about that. There was a great exchange between Gunther Steiner and Alan van der Merwe, where he was thanking him and Dr. Ian Roberts for basically helping to save Romain Grosjean's life. And he just said, you guys were like fucking fantastic, and the only time I'm going to swear on this podcast is when I'm quoting Gunther Steiner.
Exactly. You can get away with it if you're quoted.
It's quoting Gunther. Anyone who's seen Gunther Steiner on The Drive to Survive knows that he's very much a colourful character, and not just in his mannerisms, but his language as well. Was definitely one of my favourite team bosses and a bit of a celebrity, I suppose. But it was fun. I don't think Sky, I might be wrong in this, so don't quote me on this, guys. Absolutely, I don't want to get sued. But I don't think Sky apologised for that. They're very quick, these broadcasters, to apologise when someone swears on their coverage. But when I heard it, I don't recall them apologising. Or maybe they did and I misheard it. I don't know. There was lots of thoughts going on in my head with Grosjean. But it was a funny exchange. But nonetheless, given what it represented, it was nice to see Gunther Steiner straight away approaching and thanking those that were very responsive and ultimately helped save a man from, fortunately, not having to suffer any more injuries or worse than what he actually had in that incident. So, great to see. Just looking through the rest of the paddock, I think Williams, given everything that they've gone through this season, still no points. And given the races that we have left, next week's race, the Ring Road at Bahrain, might prove to be a good opportunity for them with that Mercedes engine,
hopefully,
and lower drag with the less turns. So it might be a track where George Russell might get points. But again, I think George, all things considered, despite finishing 12, drove a very good race today. His first start was terrible. But then when the restart came, he had a brilliant start by contrast. So, it's good to see that he was able to make amends when he had a second opportunity, but he drove a very solid race. He kept guys behind him. I think only Valtteri Bottas was the only driver that made a proper overtake on him in the race, and naturally with a much better car underneath him, he should do. But he did a good job. Latifi did very good as well. So I think probably fair to say Williams would probably be quite happy with how today went, and they might be looking forward to next week, as I mentioned already, that it may suit their car better with that different layout.
Yeah, I really do hope it happens. God, George really does deserve that point. I know there's no such word as officially deserving anything in sport, but if there's anybody that deserves a point for their talents and what he's given the Formula One, given the car he has, it's certainly George Russell. And fingers crossed for him next week, because he's probably have a much better chance to do it next week than he will in Abu Dhabi. So fingers crossed for George. He deserves the point, and hopefully, if it's not this season, hopefully he's given a car good enough next season for him to showcase exactly what he can give.
Absolutely. And given the nature of the regulation changes, they may find that opportunity to get more out of it than some of the top teams will. But I think that's a good way to end the podcast. Of course, as we mentioned, next week, we're still going to be at Bahrain, but it's going to be the Ring Road layout. I think there's about 4 corners on this. So I think everybody is looking forward to that race, unless you're driving a Ferrari powered car. So, and I don't exaggerate that at all. I think Ferrari are really going to, if you think they struggled this weekend, I think they're really going to struggle next weekend. And this is coming from a diehard Ferrari fan, so I'm not looking forward to that. But, I digress. It's mad that we're almost at the end of the season, Courtney. It feels strange. We've got 2 more races left to go. In the next 2 weeks, we're going to have to come up with something else to talk about to keep you guys interested. Otherwise, we might unsubscribe. We don't want that.
But yeah, as fast as this, please do stay. But as fast as this season has gone, I said this to you before we started to record. I've never known a season to have so many unique races. Some of the track specifics have helped contribute to this season. And despite it looking on paper, oh, Lewis Hamilton won again, Mercedes have absolutely dominated, it's been a boring season. Apart from the Mercedes dominance, it's been anything but. It just seems that even like races that should seem traditional, like today, Bahrain Grand Prix, it usually offers average to maybe decent races at best because of overtaking opportunities. But yet again, 2020 has delivered a unique race as to what we saw with Romain. And we can look back to pretty much every race this season and it's given us something unique. And despite it being a short season and it's been a horrible year for everybody, I think it's been one of the most enjoyable seasons we've had since maybe 2014.
In some elements, definitely. And obviously, we've got 2 more races to go. And we'll have to wait and see what the rest of the season has in store for us. Hopefully, no more of what we saw regarding Romain Grosjean. And if we do get the chance to see Romain Grosjean again in an F1 car before the season is out, that'd be brilliant. But of course, health and safety first. And if it is his last race, as I said already, congratulate him on a good career and wish him all the best in his future endeavors. But yep, it's a good way to end this episode of the podcast. It's been a really good discussion. I think you'll agree. And thanks once again, Courtney, for joining me on this episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast.
No, I love doing it, and I have no intention to go anywhere soon, so you lot are stuck with me.
Absolutely. Music to my ears, that sounds like. But yeah, as we mentioned already, guys, make sure to like, share and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Join our ever-growing DNF1 family. And of course, if you are listening to this podcast on your favorite podcasting platform outside of YouTube, you can watch these podcasts on a video podcast on our YouTube channel. Just type in DNF1-F1 podcast on the YouTube channel and you'll see us there. Make sure to like, share and subscribe to the channel. And of course, follow us on social media as well. DNF1_podcast for Twitter and Instagram, and DNF1-F1 podcast for Facebook and YouTube. So all that's left to say, guys, is thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast.
See you soon.